What if one country paid $6.4 billion to build a bridge, gave the other country half ownership for free, and then that country threatened to block its own gift from opening? Tonight, that's not a hypothetical. That's exactly what just happened between Canada and the United States. And what it exposed is far more damaging than any tariff. Breaking tonight, Canada's infrastructure strategy just called Washington's bluff. Trump didn't negotiate, he panicked. Tensions are escalating across the border tonight. The United States president posted a late-night threat on social media, claiming he would block the opening of the Gordie Howe International Bridge, a $6.4 billion crossing linking Windsor, Ontario, to Detroit, Michigan. A bridge Canada financed entirely on its own. A bridge Trump himself endorsed, funded, and praised during his first term. Everyone believed Washington held the leverage in this relationship. Trade hawks assumed Canada would buckle under pressure. Analysts expected Ottawa to delay the opening, renegotiate terms, or offer concessions to keep the peace. They were all utterly incorrect. Ottawa, February 10, 2026. Standing before reporters on Parliament Hill, Prime Minister Mark Carney delivered a response so measured, so surgically precise, that it left Washington scrambling for a coherent reply. Canada financed this bridge. Michigan shares ownership under a signed agreement. American and Canadian steel built it. Workers from both nations constructed it. We look forward to its opening. Translation: Ottawa just told the Oval Office that contracts don't expire because someone had a bad night on social media. And what happened next revealed exactly why Canada's quiet infrastructure diplomacy is reshaping the power dynamics of this continent, while Washington's leverage collapses under the weight of its own contradictions. Dear viewers, what unfolded over the following 48 hours wasn't a trade dispute. It was a masterclass in how a country that builds things defeats a country that only threatens things. And the details, the specific, documented, publicly available details, tell a story that American media has barely begun to process. Let's start with the facts that Washington apparently forgot. The Gordie Howe International Bridge was not a surprise. It was not a secret Canadian plot. It was negotiated openly, signed in 2012 by Michigan's Republican Governor Rick Snyder, reviewed by the United States Department of State, and granted a presidential permit in 2013. In 2017, Donald Trump and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau issued a joint statement calling the bridge a vital economic link between the two nations. In December 2019, Trump signed legislation that included $15 million in U.S. customs funding for the project. Read that again. Trump personally authorized federal dollars for this bridge during his first term. The ownership structure, the financing model, the construction timeline, none of it changed between 2019 and 2026. What changed was Canada's posture. Mark Carney signed a trade agreement with China that reduced tariffs on Canadian canola from 85% to 15%, unlocking an estimated $7 billion in new export opportunities. Ontario imposed a retaliatory ban on American alcohol sales in provincial stores. Canada stopped asking for permission to diversify its economy. And that, not concrete or steel, is what made Washington uncomfortable. Now here's where this story turns from remarkable to extraordinary. Trump's Truth Social post on February 9th claimed that Canada owned both sides of the bridge, that the United States was being taken advantage of, that compensation was required before the crossing could open. Every single one of those claims was publicly, demonstrably, documentably wrong. Canada does not own both sides. Michigan owns half under the 2012 agreement, an agreement Michigan signed voluntarily because it was an extraordinary deal. The state contributed zero construction funding, not a dollar. In exchange, Michigan received joint ownership of a $6.4 billion asset and the right to collect 50% of net toll revenues once Canada recovers its investment. Let that sink in. Canada built the bridge. Canada paid for it, and Canada gave Michigan half ownership for free. The United States was not being taken advantage of. It was being handed one of the most generous infrastructure deals in North American history. And who corrected the president? Not Ottawa, not Carney, a Republican former governor of Michigan. Rick Snyder published a column in the Detroit News dismantling Trump's claims point by point. He reminded readers that Michigan negotiated this deal specifically to secure long-term economic benefits without upfront cost. He warned that blocking the bridge would primarily harm American workers, American businesses, and Michigan's auto industry. And then Snyder dropped the detail that makes this entire episode make sense. The Moroun Family. The Ambassador Bridge, built in 1929, is the only truck-capable crossing between Detroit and Windsor. It has been privately owned by the Moroun family of Detroit since 1979. For decades, that single crossing has generated more than $60 million annually in toll revenue. A private monopoly controlling one of the most critical trade corridors on the continent. When plans for the Gordie Howe Bridge gained traction, the Morouns fought it with everything they had. They spent roughly $30 million backing a Michigan ballot initiative to block it. Voters rejected it by 60%. They filed multiple federal lawsuits claiming exclusive crossing rights. They lost every case. The Supreme Court declined to hear their appeal. They ran advertisements on Fox and Friends during Trump's first term, urging him to cancel the project. He didn't cancel it then. But now, with construction nearly complete and the opening approaching, a late-night social media post threatened to do what courts, ballots, and lobbying campaigns could not. Snyder's assessment was devastating. He wrote that there would be one big winner if the blockade succeeded, and it would not be the United States government. It would not be American workers. It would be the private family whose monopoly would remain intact. Dear viewers, pause on that for a moment. A sitting president threatened to block a completed $6.4 billion international bridge, one his own administration approved, funded, and praised. And the primary beneficiary of that threat would have been a single, wealthy family protecting a private toll monopoly. That is not trade policy. That is not negotiation. That is something else entirely. And how did Michigan respond? With unusual, bipartisan unity. Senator Elissa Slotkin warned that canceling the project would carry serious repercussions for Michigan businesses, supply chains, and consumers. Governor Gretchen Whitmer's office issued a statement emphasizing that the bridge supports jobs, strengthens the auto industry, and was built by union workers from both countries. Even Michigan House Speaker Matt Hall acknowledged publicly that the existing Ambassador Bridge is privately owned and could itself become a target of Canadian retaliation. The economic case is not ambiguous. The Detroit-Windsor corridor handles roughly a quarter of all merchandise trade between Canada and the United States. The integrated North American auto industry depends on components crossing that border multiple times before a finished vehicle rolls off the assembly line. The Ambassador Bridge feeds into Windsor city streets, forcing trucks through traffic lights and urban congestion. The Gordie Howe Bridge connects directly to Ontario Highway 401 and Interstate 75, freeway to freeway, eliminating bottlenecks entirely. A University of Windsor study estimated the new crossing could reduce commercial transit times by up to 20 minutes per trip. Over 30 years, that efficiency translates to approximately $2.3 billion in savings for trucking companies and the industries they serve, including American manufacturers and agricultural exporters. And there's the redundancy factor that no one in Washington seemed to consider. With only one truck-capable crossing, any disruption to the Ambassador Bridge, a structural issue, a mechanical failure, a protest blockade, halts heavy commercial traffic entirely. The tunnel cannot absorb that load. The Gordie Howe Bridge provides a second route, strengthening supply chain resilience for both countries. Blocking it would have preserved a single point of failure in one of the most important trade corridors on the continent. Now contrast Washington's chaos with Ottawa's response. Carney called Trump directly the morning after the post. No public shouting match, no retaliatory threats. 4 facts delivered calmly. Canada financed it. Michigan co-owns it. Both nations' steel built it. Both nations' workers constructed it. Then he expressed that he looked forward to the opening. He asked U.S. Ambassador Pete Hoekstra, a longtime Michigan congressman, to help maintain constructive dialogue. He even added a light remark about Canada's women's hockey team facing the Americans that day, signaling confidence rather than confrontation. The White House responded by doubling down, calling it unacceptable for Canada to own the bridge fully. An assertion already contradicted by Michigan's own officials, a Republican former governor's published column, and the text of a signed international agreement. This is what happens when political strategy collides with documented reality. The contracts don't change, the permits don't expire, the steel doesn't unbuild itself. Canada structured a deal that gave Michigan half ownership of a multi-billion-dollar asset for free, created thousands of jobs, and built a crossing designed to move 8,000 trucks and 6,000 commuters daily between 2 deeply connected economies. The bridge stands, the agreement holds, and the country that tried to weaponize infrastructure against its closest ally ended up being corrected, not by Ottawa, but by its own former governor, its own senators, and the text of its own signed agreements. So was this ever about the bridge? Or was it about a country discovering that leverage only works when the other side hasn't already finished building? And when a social media threat meets a $6.4 billion completed structure backed by a decade of signed contracts, which one blinks first? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this breakdown gave you context that headlines consistently miss, support the channel by liking the video so it reaches more people who want substance instead of noise. Subscribe to Canada Next for fact-driven analysis on the stories reshaping economic and political power across borders. Turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. See you in the next one.